So we shall start with Dr. Murugan, and he's the Chief Radiologist and Managing Director of Clarity the Imaging Center. A passionate teacher, he's a much sought after speaker in the radiology academic circle, and we are truly lucky to have him. And he is going to dwell on imaging the optic nerve, the radiologist uptake. So on to you.
Am I visible, ma'am?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yes, good evening to you all, and at the outset, best wishes for the challenging year ahead. So in the next maybe 10 to 12 minutes, we are going to discuss about the role of imaging. In fact, I'm really proud to be part of this webinar being conducted by ARC. So it's a pleasure. So what I have done is I have put some slides, but maybe instead of rushing through, I'll take a couple of minutes more since I've already got the permission. To start with, the imaging modalities, about a decade or so back, it used to be CT scan. Now, as far as neuro-ophthalmology is concerned, it's the only investigation of choice, if at all, in most of the situations is MRI. And with the newer advances like MR angiogram and MR venogram, which are, as we know, are non-contrast studies, has really given a lot of ammunition to the imaging capabilities in the present day. So, as we are aware, CT, just to differentiate, I will be concentrating mainly on MRI, but just to highlight, CT is extremely good for looking at the bony anatomy. So you can see that it gives excellent information about the bony detail, especially the fractures, which is sometimes very useful to assess optic nerve injury, and calcifications and foreign bodies, anything which is hyperdense, it's picked up by CT much better. But then when it comes to soft tissue detail, MRI is head and shoulders above CT scan. You can look at the different contrast, the T1, the T2, the STIR sequence, all of us are familiar. And now of late, there's a Dixon sequence, which is very robust fat suppression sequence, especially for orbit to enhance or look at the optic nerves. Then we have the FLAIR sequence, which is excellent for demyelination. And of course, we also know about diffusion sequence, which is a very quick sequence to detect infarct, much earlier than CT scan. It can pick up even small brainstem infarct much earlier. So I have planned in such a way that we'll be going from front to back. So these are some of the common indications. So I'll be approaching it from this point of view, especially the globe injuries and, or lesions from the globe. So these are some of the indications: monocular visual loss, unilateral hemianopia, bitemporal, then homonymous semianopia, then depending on the quadrant, superior or inferior quadrant myopia, and of course, homonymous hemianopia with macular sparing. Now, coming to the first indication, monocular vision loss, may not be in the order of occurrence, but then lesions of globe also we need to assess: trauma, infection, and tumor. Then, of course, the main focus will be on the imaging of the optic nerves, especially trauma, optic neuritis, which we will deal a little bit in detail, and tumors also. So injury, when it comes to globe injury, yes, CT will be the first investigation, because any trauma, CT will be the first choice. And if you are able to assess the optic nerve, it is well and good. But many a time, it is not just about continuity of the nerve, sometimes about the contusion, the subtle edema within the optic nerve, which MRI is very, very useful, and it can pick up much better than CT scan. When it comes to infection also, yes, CT can be a good starting point, especially it can quickly, segmentize whether it's a preseptal or postseptal. But more, if you want more information, I would suggest an MRI, because when it's postseptal, then we have to assess whether there is abscess collection, especially small abscess like this. Most of the time, it is paranasal sinusitis. And also, when it comes to orbital apex and cavernous sinus, MRI is the modality of choice. Many times, CT cannot pick up the lesions in the orbital apex and cavernous sinus. Of course, ocular tumors, just for completion's sake, I'm not going into the details. Melanoma, which is the commonest primary tumor, MRI has got a slight advantage because the melanin content can appear bright on T1. So we'll be able to come to a reasonable conclusion whether we are dealing with melanoma. Similarly, metastasis, which is the commonest malignant lesion. Okay? Melanoma is the commonest primary, whereas the commonest malignant lesion in globe is metastasis. the advantage here is it can also pick up the other lesions here. For example, here the diagnosis was easy because there was one more lesion here. The MRI brain with contrast can pick up small metastases. Sometimes when we have a single lesion, when we do MRI, there'll be multiple small lesions in the brain or cerebellum, which will help to conclude the diagnosis as metastasis. Coming to optic nerve injury, already we have discussed that CT will be the primary investigation or preliminary investigation to assess the fracture, especially. But MRI comes later or concurrently to assess the optic nerve. For example, here, the small bone fragment and optic canal is beautifully seen with CT because the bony details are much better seen. Whereas MRI is still required because you can see that the nerve is continuous, but then there is a contusion here, small contusion. This is flare sequence. The nerve is continuous, but then we're able to see the contusion, which can explain the visual loss in this patient. Also, there's a small contusion in the brain as well. Coming to tumors, optic nerve tumors, all of us are familiar with the tram track sign, wherein the sheath enhances, the meningioma around the optic nerve enhances. It's called tram track sign. In fact, this is also meningioma, but you can see that optic nerve is normal. So thereby, we are able to differentiate from optic glioma, whereas here in this case, you can see the entire nerve is thickened. So that is the advantage of MRI. Okay, it can beautifully show the nerve sheath tumor separate from the optic nerve. So MRI is good for characterization. Coming to optic neuritis, which is one of the commonest indications as far as neuro-ophthalmology, MRI brain with contrast is the first choice. And it's excellent, as I already said, stir sequence and flare sequence. So the importance is, more importantly, to assess the concurrent brain lesion, because that kind of decides the future probability of developing MS. And MRI is any day so far superior to CT scan for picking up small plaques. So this is a typical scenario wherein we can see that in a SIR sequence, we are able to see the enlarged edematous optic nerve. This is a coronal sequence. Contrast, it is enhancing. And also in the flare sequence, multiple small plaques. This is a classical presentation of multiple sclerosis as optic neuritis. Many a time, it can be the first presentation, and unless the patient is treated with steroid, they can later on proceed to classical MS. Now, always the close cousin is neuromyelitis optica, because many a time the differentiation may be very challenging. This is one interesting article where they have found a way to differentiate. What they have done is they have made a scoring, the extent of involvement of the optic nerve, right side, left side, let us say the optic segment, the canal segment, the intraorbital segment. So they have given a scoring. So ultimately the take-home message is predilection for more posterior segments of optic nerve is common in neuromyelitis optica. So naturally the optic chiasmal involvement is more common with neuromyelitis optica, and bilateral involvement again more common. And also we have other associated features, especially the distribution of plaques will be in the region of aquaporin, for example, periaqueductal, brainstem, and the flora of fourth ventricle. And of course, extensive cord involvement is more towards neuromyelitis optica spectrum disorder. Now, the other common mimic can be non-arthritic anterior ischemic neuropathy. And again, this study has compared the role of imaging. Sorry, I didn't get, there was something. Okay. So this study has clearly shown that MRI is positive in optic neuritis in 31 out of 32 patients, whereas in patients with non-arthritic ischemia, only 5 patients show that. That means more or less, if MRI is normal, we can kind of exclude, not always, but kind of exclude ischemic optic neuropathy, because it's very difficult to pick up optic ischemic neuropathy in MRI. So patients with bilateral papilledema, as we know, commonest cause is idiopathic ventricular hypertension, but neoplasm can occur. And CVD, with the advent of MRI, there's so many cases of sinus thrombosis are picked up of late, and investigation will be brain with venogram. Venogram is again non-contrast, simple sequence, 5-minute sequence. This is a normal venogram. All the sinus are patent. Here you can see it's all occluded. Most of the sinus are occluded. And of course, many a time it is idiopathic ventricular hypertension, and MRI can directly show evidence. For example, it's empty cella, and you can see that optic nerve, it is tortuous. The distension of subarachnoid space is the widening of subarachnoid space, and venogram is normal. This is just a small artifact here. This is a classical idiopathic ventricular hypertension. Coming to more posterior lesions, patient presenting with hemianopia nasal side The lesion can be on one side of optic chiasm. For example, here it was a meningioma, typically in the anterior clinoid process compressing on the optic chiasm. Here again, MRI is far superior to CT scan. CT can initially diagnose, but neurosurgeons prefer MRI later on to know the intricate anatomy of the lesion in relation to the vessels and optic chiasma, etc. Patient with progressive bilateral hemianopia, MRI is the choice, and it shows the pituitary adenoma. But in such cases, a neurosurgeon prefer also a CT scan, mainly to know the approach. For example, they would like to know the sphenoid sinus pneumatization because the approach is transnasal. So in addition to MRI, they also prefer to do a CT scan just to know the bony anatomy well. Coming to the quadrants, of course, this is a patient with temporal lobe infarct. So this patient presented with upper quadrant anomia, whereas patients with parietal lobe infarct will present with inferior quadrant anomia. As I mentioned earlier, MRI has really revolutionized the stroke imaging. About 10 years back, it used to be CT scan. For any patient with stroke, it used to be CT scan. Now, MRI has really taken over stroke imaging. It can pick up infarct much earlier, within few hours of onset, especially in the brainstem. So in neuro-ophthalmology, MRI is very, very important and critical. And it can also pick up hemorrhage as good as CT scan. There's a misconception that CT is better for hemorrhage. No longer. MRI can pick up even subarachnoid hemorrhage much better. So this patient presenting with hemianopia with macular sparring, of course, a classical occipital lobe infarct. So I think that is the last slide. Hope I have not crossed the line. So to summarize, MRI is the modality, more or less, almost in all the indications as far as neuro-ophthalmology is concerned, especially patients presenting with visual loss. The role of CT comes in few cases wherein we want to assess trauma, to know the fractures, to know the location of bone fragments, or sometimes rarely in patients with retinoblastoma to know the extent of calcification, etc. Otherwise, it is MRI all the way. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Murugan. That was a wonderful talk, even for a non-neuro-ophthalmologist. Murli, would you take your first question? Murli, are you connected?
Yes, madam. Yes, madam. Yes, madam. So I have a few questions, sir. One is regarding the MR venogram. So yes. I just wanted to know what is the principle of MR venogram and what is the role of a contrast enhanced MR venogram?
Okay. This is level 3 imaging. The MR venogram is a non-contrast. Basically, the sequence, it suppresses the static tissue and it brings out the signal from the flowing blood. Same like MR angiogram, but this is a non-contrast technique. So sometimes there can be pseudostenosis, especially the left transverse sinus. Most of the time, if you see, it's hypoplastic. But in a given situation, whether it's really hypoplastic or whether there is thrombosis, as radiologists, we look at different sequences. We look at the sagittal to know whether the lumen is patent or hypoplastic. But as you rightly pointed out, the only way we can 100% say is due to an MR contrast enhanced venogram, which will, all the so-called stenotic, the pseudo-stenotic areas will be opacified. So we will resolve the doubt whether there is a real stenosis or a pseudo-stenosis.
Sir, is it the same contrast that we use, the same gadolinium contrast that we use for
yes,
MR?
The same contrast. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Would you routinely recommend spinal screening for suspected optic neuritis?
Yes, madam. In fact, as a protocol, we have a protocol, internal protocol. Whenever there are plaques in the brain, we usually screen the spinal cord. It's very unlikely that the patient will have plaques in the spinal cord without involvement of brain. Usually there'll be plaques, especially in the infratentorium, like brainstem, cerebellum. Then even without request, we sometimes run down the protocol that will give more context, especially the neuromyelitic or spectrum disorder will have plaques extending for more than 3 or 4 vertebral segments. That will give us confidence also, but not as a routine, but whenever we see plaques in the brain, yes.
Yes, Murli.
Yes, sir. So sometimes we come across these patients with ocular ischemic syndrome or ischemic optic neuropathy where we want to know the status of the carotids. So would you recommend a Doppler imaging of the carotids or would MR angio be more suited for this purpose?
Personally, I would say Doppler is superior it's very subjective matter. In fact, the neurologists, among the neurologists also, there is an old school of thought and newer generation, some of them prefer MR angiogram, but I feel that older generation, because for simple reason, small plaques, which is not critical, in the sense it may not be causing more than 50% stenosis, but small plaques can be easily made out with a probe, with the ultrasound probe. Whereas MRI will tell us whether there is more than 50% stenosis or less than 50% stenosis. It is not as accurate as a Doppler study. So the plaque imaging is very good with Doppler, but for the sake of simplicity, because patient coming for MRI, brain and orbits, we can just combine the study with MR angiogram, which is a non-contrast. For that purpose, it's good. Otherwise, I would slightly prefer a carotid Doppler.
Even for giant cell arthritis, sir, even for giant cell arthritis?
Yes, very much. Because in that case, I would say MRI doesn't play a role, because by keeping the probe on top of the superficial temporal artery, we'll be able to detect the wall thickening much better. Of course, there are indirect methods. We can give contrast and look for the enhancement of the vessel, but then that's a very costly procedure. Whereas a simple Doppler of a temporal lobe artery will give the diagnosis. Cost effective, yes.
Thank you so much. I would want you to stay on and give your thoughts as we move on.